Hi, everybody. I am Carol Kauffman, the founder of the Institute of Coaching, and I am here with my very good friend, Bill Berman. So I'll tell you a little bit about Bill. He's the CEO of Berman Leadership, which is a consulting firm. He's done a whole bunch of interesting things in his life, which we may talk about later. He's also the former president of Division 13 of the American Psychological Association, and he has recently written this book, which we will talk about. So, Bill, do you want to talk about, just give us a sense of your book in a nutshell?
So most things happen in organizations these days, not because somebody exerts authority and tells other people what to do. They happen because somebody influences other people and gets them aligned with what they need and helps them make it happen. And in order to do that, it's really important to make sure that you do three things. First of all, that you know who you are, you know what your strengths are, that you know the job that you have to do and really well. And you also understand the culture that you're working in so that you can do those things in the way the culture can understand. And those are the three keys, in my view, to building influence in an organization, and influence leads you to impact.
So this is a dumb question, but what is influence and how do you know if you have it?
So influence is the ability to get other people to work with you, to listen to you, to help you accomplish the goals that you want to accomplish, and to follow you as a leader, as a manager. And that happens because you're particularly focused on the right things. A lot of times you'll see in the literature, there's talk about building relationships and building allies and listen to people. Fundamental skills you need to have influence is to know exactly what your job is, not by your definition, but by the definition of the people around you. And you do that job on a regular basis, consistent basis, and you're really good at it. Whether that's you as an individual, you as a leader of a team, or you as a leader of a business.
So many people that I've spoken with who have written books, there was sort of a moment that was like the spark that ignited the idea that then led to the book. Do you have that experience, that there was a thing that happened that started this moving?
I do. There were probably 20 little sparks. You know, I was sitting there flicking the lighter and it wasn't quite lighting. But I was working with somebody a few years ago, and he was absolutely, his job by his job definition was that he was the co-CEO of the business. He was supposed to be an equal leader with the other person. And he was struggling with that because he wasn't getting the kind of attention he wanted. He wasn't getting the kind of credibility he wanted. People weren't following him. And we spent a bunch of time talking about what his co-CEO wanted and what he wanted and what the organization needed from him. And at one point I said to him, you know, you're not the co-CEO. You may think you're the co-CEO, but actually you're the director of communications. And your job is to be the spokesperson for this organization. That's it. And we went with that, and he applied that in the setting that he was working in. And he came back to me and he said, oh my God, you're exactly right. That's exactly what I'm here to do. And it made a huge difference in how he felt about his job and the impact he had on the organization because he embraced that. So that was really the turning point for me.
So that's interesting. What you said earlier is like, know what your job is, regardless of what that title is, to sort of have a sense of, if you're clear on your mission, then kind of influence will follow, and then impact will follow. Is that sound right?
That's exactly right. Once you start doing your job consistently, the one that the organization wants you to do, and you do it in the way the culture understands, that's another big piece of it. Once you do those, then you can start doing more. You can start solving problems. You can start providing insights. You can start leading new solutions to problems, and you can start to really influence the organization. But the culture is an equally important part to the job. I've worked with countless people, I suspect you have as well, where they come into an organization and they act themselves, but the way they're normally oriented to act or way they learned in a prior company doesn't fit with the organization that they work in. And if you don't align with that, if you're not in tune with that, you really are going to struggle. And that was multiple ahas over a period of time. But there was one particular company that I worked with where the culture was very strong, very powerful. And the people who came in from the outside had a hard time aligning with the characteristics of that culture. It was actually more like a Japanese company in the sense that there was a lot of collaboration and a lot of discussion and a lot of sharing of information before decisions get made. And so that was, people had a hard time adapting to that.
Oh, that's interesting, because the way that I'm envisioning it is almost like what their pace was. So part of like the influence is adjusting to that culture, whether to be forceful or whether to be collaborative, lead from the front, lead from behind. But also I hear you saying it's like, it's nuanced, this sort of how you pace yourself and integrate. What's an example of someone you saw do it really well and someone who like really flubbed it?
So I have a colleague who I've known for probably 15 years, and she is absolutely terrific at this. Wherever she's worked, and I've known her in 3 different companies, she's soon going to a 4th. Wherever she's been, she aligns herself with her manager. She understands what her manager does. She solves problems for her manager. She makes sure that he's engaged or she's engaged with her to accomplish what they need to do. And she knows what her job really is. So she's very focused on what the key deliverables are for her, whether it's in her job description or not. So if she had a boss once where it was clearly her job to help that boss stand out. So and we don't necessarily like that, but sometimes that's the job we have. And she was very good. She didn't get into arguments. She didn't get into power struggles. She just helped that boss succeed. And that helped lift her up. And she's gone from being a consultant to being a director to being a senior director to her new job is as a chief talent officer for a publicly traded company. And she's just moved step by step doing that. She knows how to act in the culture, and she knows how to help everybody else get their needs met. She treats everybody like a customer, which is really critical to this. I've known lots of people who have really struggled with this. One that comes to mind is a fella who had come from a financial technology, a fintech organization. And it was a rough and tumble, aggressive, pushy, startup kind of culture. And he came into that company that I was talking about before. He came into a very subdued, calm, highly collaborative, highly over-communicating organization. And he was just driving everybody else nuts. He was doing great stuff. He was moving the organization exactly where it needed to go. But he was so driven and so blunt and direct with everybody. And he felt like it's not just communication, it's also decision making. He felt like he ought to be able to make these decisions on his own. Well, in this company, most people don't make decisions on their own. They collaborate to make decisions. And so he was really struggling with that. But we were able to help him figure out not only what his job was, because he was doing a good job on his job, but how he was supposed to make things happen. And he, as you said, he slowed down his pace. He over-communicated. He let other people in on the decision-making process. He began to understand their context, so the shared references that they had. And he was able to really adapt and thrive in that culture.
That's great. You know, one thing I hear in what you're saying is, you know, you've talked about treat everyone like a customer. And I think, okay, what does that mean? Well, when you were talking about the first woman, what I was struck by was you said part of her job was to make her manager look great, and she was okay with that. But it sounds like she was okay with that because she was able to be ego-free. And there's an irony in there that the more kind of influence that you want to have and the greater impact you can have as a result, ironically, is the more you can sort of be ego-free. So that's an interesting paradox.
I think that's true, although I think the way I would frame it is that you have to be short-term ego-free.
Okay.
People have ambition, they have drive, they want to accomplish things. The question is, what's the right pathway to accomplishing those things? And if you're short-term ego-focused, then you get offended when your boss says, tell me all the details about what you're doing, or help me understand what your plan is with this specific customer, because you're good at that. You know how to do that. So why is she getting involved in that? And so if you're short-term ego-focused, that's what happens, and you get into these power struggles. If you're long-term ego-focused, you keep your eye focused on the long-term goal, which is success in your career, success in your organization, bigger influence, more impact, and then whatever else goes with that. Reinforcements, rewards, recognition, whatever it is you're looking for.
So I'm going to change the channel for a minute and talk to you. So you have been in many, many different kinds of work cultures. And I think it would be interesting for people to know something about your, shall we say, your past.
My sordid past? My assorted past.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. I learned about teams way before I knew anything about teams. My first real job was I was a chef in a restaurant on Cape Cod when I was in college. And there were 5 people in the kitchen, and we worked 70 hours a week for 12 weeks straight. And we just built up a rhythm and a style. We learned to cover each other's backs. We learned to support each other. And we worked like a well-oiled machine. And it was, although the hours were horrible, it was one of the best team experiences I've ever had. Since that time, I've been a clinical psychologist. I've been an academic psychologist. So I was at Cornell Medical College and Fordham University. I left Fordham University because I started a software company that I grew and was lucky, and it grew at the right time, and ended up selling that to a larger what's called a healthcare enterprise information company. So I worked for them and ran their professional services group for several years, and I had P&L responsibility for about 1/3 of the organization's revenues. So and then in 2004, that's when I left that organization and started to become an executive coach. And it really was an opportunity for me. I had my own coach, and they said, why don't you consider this thing called executive coaching? You have the psychology background, you have the business experience. I think that's a unique contribution. And that's where I've been ever since. I've been doing it for 16 years and plan to keep doing it for another 16.
Well, also something you left out, which is part of our connection. So very often when I'm coaching someone, and we've talked in our other work about this thing called the infinity loop of coaching is here and consulting is here. And how do you go back and forth? Or if you think of it this way, pulling from the client and then making an offer. And when I've hit the edge of my expertise in terms of onboarding, I've had you come in because you worked with George Bratt, your co-author, George, who is quite a brilliant guy. And you guys have done very, very high-end onboarding. So I'd love to hear a little bit about that career and how you see influence to impact in that onboarding process.
So the fundamental, and George has been an advisor and a mentor and friend to me for 15 years. So it's been a great learning experience for me. The fundamental understanding we have of onboarding is that senior executives, CEOs, C-suite executives are incredibly good and incredibly skilled at the things that they know best. They're incredible marketers. They're incredible sales leaders. They're incredible strategic thinkers. They're not necessarily good at how to get it all started. So those first 90 to 180 days aren't necessarily something they've done a lot, because perhaps they've been in the same company, or they've been in the same job for 5 or 6 or 10 years. And so they don't necessarily know what best practice is for those first 90 days. And what George Bratt and our group, which is called Prime Genesis, and the New Leaders 100-Day Action Plan focus on is getting it exactly right in those first 100 days, so that every message you give is the message you want to give. Every move you make is the message you want to make. And you bring your team along with you and it's again about influencing the team around you and the people around you, and having a bigger impact faster on the organization. And I started working with George in 2005. So
what, when you're working at the top of the house, what are the biggest influencing mistakes that you've seen?
I think, there are lots. I think one is that people think they are supposed to do it all themselves. I have seen a number of incredibly smart, capable people feel like their job is to go off and figure out what the new strategy ought to be, and then come back and tell everybody. And of course, as you know, when you tell somebody what their behaviors and their strategy and their actions ought to be, they tend not to buy into that, because they want to play a role in contributing to, they want autonomy, they want agency in what they do. So part of what we do is help them to learn that the co-development or the co-creation of that strategy in most cases is the preferable way to go. Doesn't mean you don't have a sense of what the strategy is, but you help the other people bring it along and refine it. I think that's one of the common mistakes. I think the other most common mistake people make is they either blow up their team immediately and try to bring in a whole new crew of people, which most organizations have trouble with, or they work too hard and too long to try to bring along people who they kind of know aren't really going to be successful. And so they don't make those tough decisions quickly enough to keep the organization running. Beyond the onboarding piece, my experience is that one of the mistakes people make is that they underestimate the impact of a toxic team member. The toxic team members can be incredibly devastating to your work and undermine most of the things you do. So helping people identify those toxic team members and do something about it is really a critical part of the role of a leader.
Yeah, I find it very ironic that sort of toxic people are fabulous influencers. They can just whip through a system and destroy it in no time. So I'd love to hear a contrast. We've talked just now about the kind of influencing sort of mistakes, or I guess outstandingly positive things at the top of the house. Your book also, I think, is very helpful to a lot of coaches, because it talks about the range. It also talks about a lot of the people in the middle of the house. I'm wondering if you could kind of speak to the different challenges you see at that, those places in organizations.
One of the things you see in the middle of an organization is that people are not individual contributors, but they have individual responsibilities. They are not necessarily managers, because maybe their job is director or VP, but they do manage people and teams. And they're not specifically a leader because they're not high enough in the organization, but they have leadership responsibilities and leadership authority. So they have to learn to manage all three of those. They have to be able to do their own personal job. They have to be able to manage the people around them, and they have to be able to lead parts of the organization to get where they want to go. And I see that as one of the big struggles that people have. I also think I had a client early on who said that he had been told, I believe it was in the military, that great leaders give their people three things: something to believe in, someone to believe in, and someone who believes in them.
Mm.
And I find that most people I work with as managers, senior leaders, executives are usually incredibly good at one of those, pretty good at two of them, but they're missing on one of those pieces. And a lot of the work we do as coaches is figuring out which one of those and helping them to make those skills better at the same time that they're emphasizing the skills that they actually have. So we want to, if they're a great leader of people, someone who believes in them, then the goal is to help them build that up and at the same time help them be more strategic. That's the way I think about it.
That's interesting. Not until this moment did I think about the intersection of positive psychology and the Pygmalion effect in what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So, which is if you want to be influencing, how to be, again, that kind of polarity of the more I believe in you, the more I wind up being able to influence you because I've created kind of an open loop and more trust and connection. And therefore, you know, if I'm following what you were talking about, that will increase my capacity to influence. So that's fascinating.
And how do you convince people that you believe in them? You convince them by listening to them, by understanding what their needs and their goals and their desires are, by working to find the common shared beliefs and shared attitudes, and working to find those common grounds that you can both move forward and you can both accomplish your goals at the same time. When you do that, people will follow you because they know you believe in them and you're willing to follow them when you need to.
Oh, interesting. It's like one of the most powerful ways to be an influencer is to be influenced by the people. So this sort of virtuous cycle.
Yep, absolutely.
So I had one question in terms of what do you think the influencing challenges are, you know, with issues of inclusion and equity. So how is that fitting into your thinking?
You know, when George and I were thinking about this, we had a lot of points of view about this, but we also felt that that we weren't necessarily the right people to be talking about that. Obviously, I'm a middle-aged white male with a very privileged background. And so I don't have that experience. So we asked Greg Pennington, who is a long-term colleague of mine through the Society of Consulting Psychology. We asked him to write a chapter on the role, on how you think about bias and discrimination in the context of an organizational role, and particularly for people of color or women or any other underrepresented group. And I think he had a very useful perspective on that, which is that there's a number of steps that you have to take when you're trying to understand whether, in fact, there is an issue of bias here. And one of the questions you have to ask about bias is it about me because I don't do well or I'm not doing what's needed? Or is it about me because of my skin color or my gender or my age or whatever, my sexual preference? And you do that in a variety of ways, but one of the ways is by collecting data, by looking around you and seeing whether this happens to other people, seeing whether it's happened to you in other situations. So have you gotten, you know, if you're getting critical feedback, have you gotten that kind of critical feedback before, or is it novel? And then you have to really decide, and what am I willing to do to succeed in this organization? If there is bias, whether it's conscious or unconscious, am I willing to take the steps that I need to take to be successful? Because as middle managers, individual contributors, middle managers, even senior managers, we have a very limited ability to influence an organizational culture. Right? That really starts at the top and works its way down. And so you have to make the decision of, am I willing to put in the time, the energy, make the sacrifices that I need to make to achieve the stature that I need in this company to really organize, to really have an impact on it. One of the things we talk about in the book is that a key question you have to ask yourself is, who am I? Who is the organization? And how do those two fit together? And, we're seeing this in as we're coming out of the COVID crisis and people are starting to go back to work. A number of people are asking themselves, if my company is saying I have to come back to work, is that the organization I want to work in? And I think people are asking even bigger questions, which is, am I doing the thing that I really want to be doing? If I'm going to be doing this for 40, 50 hours, 60 hours a week, and I'm going to be commuting an hour each way, is this how I want to spend my time? And I think you really have to think about, is what meets my needs, am I finding it in the organization that I'm working with? And I think if you're not, you have to think about what the alternatives are.
And then, it's really interesting. I had a hard time with one of my CEOs because he was on the decision factor of that. And in my humble opinion, he was being much too rigid. Of course, I could say nothing. But it's very interesting to think about the influencing aspect of it. So you're a leader in an organization and you need to influence towards, yes, come into work, or yes to, being a hybrid model. What is for those of us coaching leaders who want to help, be better influencers, what are, say, top 2 or 3 tips for us as coaches of these people? What should be top of mind for us?
I think it's a really good question, Carol. I think the critical issues are, number one, first of all, you have to have a vision. There has to be an overarching mission for the organization. People do better when there is a purpose in mind that's beyond selling widgets. And we talk about selling widgets, but we can make a difference in a variety of different ways, but you have to be able to understand what that difference is. So making sure that people have a broad vision for what they're trying to accomplish, not just if you're the CEO of an organization, but if you're the head of a division, you're the head of a function, or the head of a team. What's the vision for that team? I think you have to know that you're not there to do it alone. It's not your job to be the expert. It's your job to make everybody successful. Now, not all leaders believe that, and a lot of leaders think the team is there to support them. But in general, I think as a coach, I encourage people to think of themselves as standing on the shoulders of the team they work for. Mm-hmm. And I think, we talk a lot about servant leadership. We talk a lot about being of benefit to the other people in the organization. And I think finding ways to make them best rather than ways to make you best. I think we rise because all the boats in the organization are rising. If the people around me are successful, I'm going to be successful, and they're going to want me to be successful because I'm helping them be successful.
Mm-hmm. Well, I hear over and over again, how do you create kind of a virtual cycle in terms of, actually, I think I said virtual cycle. I meant virtuous.
Yeah, but you meant virtuous. Yeah, I got it.
Interesting slide. But I like that. So one takeaway for me is, so I'm working with one leader who's a bit of he just scares the blank out of people. And one thing we were talking about is how to have him manage his influence, because it's so powerful. Yeah. And one of the things I accidentally did, which goes along, is not to do it alone. And he came up with the idea then of creating champions for his influence. So I think there's a lot of things in what you're saying that we can kind of use and take home with us as we can look at this book. So we have just about a minute left. What are your kind of closing thoughts? What would you like us to take away with from our conversation with you or reading the book the most?
My experience is that most people that I work with are like 70, 80, 90% there, right? They've got most of the ingredients that they need to be incredibly influential. And they have to make one, maybe two, maybe 1.5 changes in how they interact or how they listen or how they communicate to have that little more juice to be that much more influential. the boundary between somebody who's good and somebody who's great is really not that much. And so I don't think we need to think, I don't want people to think that, oh, I got to make big changes in my life. Usually these are sort of course corrections that people need to make to just be that much better. I think that's the key takeaway.
I love that. That's so encouraging. How to find kind of the small thing that's going to really change the course. Bill, thank you very much for being part of our group. And we can also have some more follow-up questions and answer them as we go forward too.
Thanks, Carol. It's been a pleasure.
So how was that, Bill?